Creation Science Evangelism presents Creation in Common Sense with Eric Hovind.
Welcome to Creation in Common Sense. I'm your host, Eric Hovind. Joining me today are two guys from our question research team, Joshua Joscelyn and Jonathan Sampson. What are we talking about today, guys?
Synesthesia. We had an email actually from someone who wanted to point out something that they noticed that supported something that Dr. Hovind mentioned in a seminar at the end of Seminar 2, which referred to our experiencing the full electromagnetic spectrum, perhaps.
Yeah, I know.
Once we get to heaven.
Exactly.
And he said, perhaps I have not seen nor ear hath heard what we might be able to experience. But we're now getting reports and research is being done that indicates that perhaps we already have this kind of capacity built into our brains.
So what is synesthesia?
Simply put, it's basically super senses. So instead of just having the limited ability to listen to music, you can probably just listen to music and also taste music. So you can say, not only does this this sound good, but this also tastes very nice as well.
Wow.
Or the adverse, you can say this sounds like junk and tastes horrible. Turn it off.
That's amazing.
Synesthesia literally means having senses or combining senses. So
give me the skinny on this, 2 minutes or less. What is it like? What it's about?
Synesthesia basically has, the dominating theory is that when you are born, you already have this kind of information hardwired into your brain. But when something like a tragedy occurs, some sort of trauma to your head, you might be able to remove the inhibitions that don't allow us to access this kind of capability. So for instance, there was a baseball player who was hit on the head with a baseball, and at that point, he could remember every day of his entire life just by calling out the date. If someone called out the date to him, he could remember what he was doing, where he was, who he was with, what day of the week it was.
Unbelievable. There's been other examples of these as well, right?
Oh, absolutely.
There is probably one of the most prominent ones that people can look at online is Daniel Tammet, and he's all over the web. He's known as the Brain Boy. He's been on shows like David Letterman and the Jay Leno Show, but this gentleman here, he's from the UK, but he can actually correlate numbers with textures and shapes and colors.
So a number to him looks like...
So for instance, he sat down on the David Letterman show once, and he looked at David Letterman and he said, you look like 117. It's kind of a tall, lanky number. And it's just real interesting because these are legitimate senses that they really have. So just like I can feel a cold surface, David Letterman really looks like 117 to him.
And it goes further than that even. It's not only just a number, but he can look at a number and give it a color, a texture, and even a gender.
Mm-hmm. You're kidding.
So numbers, one might be female while two is male.
Is this a prominent thing? I mean, how do a lot of people experience this, or what's it like?
Estimates range all over the place. There's one estimate that says there's only maybe 100 people with this in the world. Some say that 1 in 20 people have some sort of form of this and may not even know it. Some people may associate a color with a number without actually seeing it on the paper. And that's actually a form of synesthesia.
There's a small test that they do. You can look at this just online, but they'll take two shapes, one with a lot of sharp, jagged edges, and then with one, more rounded edges, and say one of these is Boubla, and the other one is Kiki. And people will more generally associate Kiki with the sharp one because of the way it sounds. And so they're making this own kind of synesthesia type of correlation between the visual and the sound effect of it and saying, well, this is Kiki and that's Boubla because it's nice and round. And we don't really know why we're picking this as Kiki, but we're kind of doing it instinctively. And so it does seem like there's this kind of dormant ability in many people.
And our rhetoric also hints at that. I mean, have you ever heard someone describe something as bitterly cold?
Right.
Well, those are two senses. Or if you hear someone refer to something as maybe that's a loud color. Okay, there's sight and there's also audio. So I mean, it's amazing.
Very interesting. So what ways does this manifest itself? Obviously, Daniel Tammet, very interesting. He was able to do all kinds of stuff. What are the ways?
Well, there are several different forms, like grapheme color synesthesia, which is one we just discussed, which is where someone sees a grapheme, which is just a fancy word for a number or a color, or a letter, a symbol, and they can associate a color with that. But then there's so many others, like lexical gustatory synesthesia, which means they can actually taste something and see a color in front of their face at the same time. So when they go grocery shopping, they don't just go and look for foods that taste good together. They also look for foods that produce a nice combination of colors.
Unbelievable.
It's just amazing.
I've heard of people that actually use different words, put different tastes in their mouth.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. Yeah,
and so they hear certain words and it gives them a bad taste. They literally have to go brush their teeth. They have to clean out their mouth because of that.
Well, the Daniel Tammet gentleman that we were talking about earlier, he's famous for memorizing pi to over 22,000 decimal places. Yeah. And they did this experiment to see if he's really doing this, if he can really remember pi to this place, and what they were doing, they were running the string of pi, 3.14159 or whatever, just across the screen, and they changed one number because as he's looking at these numbers, they build these three-dimensional topographies in his mind. He actually sees these numbers, and as they're rolling pi across the screen, it gets to the part where they changed it without telling him, and he immediately said, something's wrong. It's not looking right. It's getting ugly now.
It's getting ugly.
Yeah.
And so he can actually see the stuff translate into a physical image, or kind of an abstract image inside his mind, and he knows when they changed it. Because it makes this beautiful thing into a very nasty thing.
Cannot work complex mathematics. But if you give him numbers, he can transfer those into shapes, like a scene, a topography. And when he sees that merge together, it forms a new shape, and that shape he reduces to its mathematical equivalent. And then he gives the right answer every time.
Now, you wrote a paper on it, and tell me what your conclusion is from your
I wrote
from your paper.
Synesthesia, Mystery of God's Creation, because Dr. Hovind says that perhaps one day we might be able to experience this in heaven. But this research is showing how perhaps we already have this hardwired into our brains even now. In fact, some studies have said that this system can be, or this process can be replicated by drug users. That says existing connections become used in a way that's neurochemically altered for a few hours. So theoretically, anyone could do this for a few hours.
We don't encourage that.
Yeah.
No, just gonna put that out there.
So, but my point is that we already have the hardwiring present in our bodies, in our brains, but there are certain ways that you access this that are not common.
Wow.
So you either have to have some sort of trauma, or perhaps you're born with some sort of defect that creates this amazing capacity.
So it's possible that this is actually something that we're originally created with the ability to do, and we've lost that ability now.
Well, the question has come up, is this a good thing or a bad thing?
Yeah.
And synesthetes always say it's a good thing because, for instance, when you try to memorize a scripture verse, if you were to associate a color with every word, think how much easier it would be to memorize it. Because it's been proven through testing that if you combine senses, it's easier to memorize something.
Wow.
And that's why it has led to an incredible boost in these people's intellect. For instance, Daniel Tammet can memorize or can learn a foreign language every week.
A new foreign language every week.
Every week. So this man, his IQ may be similar to ours, but his capacity, the way he can use that IQ, because he's stacking senses, is phenomenal. It's staggering.
Wow. Pretty cool. Well,
Yeah,
thanks,
yeah.
guys. I appreciate the update. And we want to thank you for joining us with Creation and Common Sense, hoping that you get good answers to good questions.